I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. And boy, what a night, what a day. Uh, I've been trying to grapple with how do we approach understanding and what we have to do, reflecting the outcome of last night and today's general election. I think that towards 3 o'clock today, we can expect a press statement from Vice President Harris uh, conceding the election. By all comments, former President Trump has emerged victorious, and we want to talk about that. So if you want to weigh in how you feel, how you felt, what you think we're going to be doing going forward as a community, we'd love to have you involved in this conversation. Also, call some people. Reach out via email or text to friends who want to join the conversation and show up in our chat. We can also send you a link. We'd love to have your voice and your presence online or in the actual program. I want to start off, though, talking and continuing with the conversation I had yesterday with Haley Taylor Schlitz. She is an assistant attorney general at the state of Minnesota. She's on the staff of Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison. She's been on this program as a surrogate for the Harris Waltz team. And we talked with anticipation and positivity yesterday and day before about our expectations, our hopes. And now it's time to talk about the reality that we're facing individually and as a community. Doc Sanchez says, thank you for this forum, Brother Doc. If you want to join the program, say yes or no, and we can send a link to you. Thank you for listening, and we appreciate you. Again, our objective today is to talk, have the conversation, and we want to have your voice. If you're not comfortable getting live on the program, just leave your notes in the chat, and we'll put those notes out so people can see you. Doc Sanchez, there you are. Thank you for the note that you're sending. We appreciate it. We're asking any and all who are connected to this to call somebody, text somebody, tweet somebody, let them know that we're having a conversation. I think a lot of people want to weigh in on their feelings, their hopes, their aspirations, their fears about where we stand. Well, let me bring in Haley Taylor Schlitz. Haley Taylor, as I was saying, is a new attorney in the AG's office for the state of Minnesota, and also a columnist here for Inside News. We're pleased to know her, and we know that you will be impressed with her as well. And what I love about the conversation is that she is young, 22 years old, and I'm 77, so I'm happy to have a conversation across the generations, because I think my duty and my obligation is to be present, to be clear, and to be a door opener, and at least a person that is sharing what I experienced, what I thought, what I knew, what I did in my civil rights and human rights journey as a Black man in America. I call myself an African in the New World. My vision of who I am has to do with not only my citizenship and my birth in this country, but my presence on the planet. And my presence on the planet, in my view, has to do with understanding my source, the origin out of which I have emerged. And in describing that, and the identity I choose to present with is, I call myself an African in the New World. I claim Africa, Africanity. I'm a Black man, and I am an American without apology. I was born here, but my parents, my mom from Mississippi, several generations out of slavery, my dad from Cuba and Jamaica, out of the same slave experience. Africans imported from our motherland to the New World, some of which in the Caribbean, South America, and some of which straight into mainland USA, but all have an experience with what we call the Ma'afa, and that is the massive broad contact between Africa and Europe, a 500-year story that resulted in a certain movement, massive movement of African people from the continent of Africa to the New World. And here, the movement uh, of our people from the Deep South into the Midwest, the North, and the movement of our people from the Caribbean all over. So, a lot to talk about. Haley, good afternoon. Again, thank you for being here. I am honored to be in conversation with you. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings right now?
Well, thank you for having me and this really important conversation. Of course, everyone I think is feeling the disappointment. And as you spoke about your ancestry, it made me think about mine. I'm 50% Nigerian. So coming from that side of, like you said, Africa and kind of living that American nightmare. And then the other 50%, French, Irish, British, kind of coming here through Ellis Island, seeking that American dream. And it really is an interesting perspective for me as well to see where our country is at, how far we've come, but also really, truly, this election is very representative of how far left we have to go. I think that Black Gen Z, like you said, I'm 22, so being part of Gen Z, being young, this this night or last night, we had a lot of hopes for what America could have been, what we thought it was ready for, to make this history, to really, start a new chapter, turn the page. And that's kind of where, you felt that excitement. That's the turnout you saw, the polls we were reading. That's kind of where we were at. And, we wake up today with this shift in understanding and in perspective. And obviously, we still stand on that her qualifications and her dedication were enough and more beyond enough, and she was the most qualified. But we come in now with this perspective of the truth that our ancestors knew very well. And kind of going back to where we started this conversation, our ancestors knew this very well, especially those who live the American nightmare, that progress in America is a very hard fought, it's continuous and very fragile. And I think for me, just speaking to my generation, and hopefully, we'll get into this really good conversation very quickly. And it's not it was never done. And I think we kind of going to what we were talking about yesterday, about education and the civil rights era, kind of teaching it as like a relic of the past. And Martin Luther King or Rosa Parks or the fight that was being fought is a relic of the past. And the sanitized history we're taught kind of has disconnected a lot of young people from reality of the fight that's still ongoing. So that's kind of where I'm at. Still a lot of steam. No time for self-pity. Still a lot of fight left and a lot of work. Really, I mean, it's just a reminder that this was going to hopefully be a great checkpoint, but this election was never going to be a signifier that the fight was over. So really just pushing forward.
I think in yesterday's conversation, Alfred Babington Johnson used the phrase, one of the movement phrases. I think I may be saying it incorrectly, but la luta continua, and that was the Portuguese version for la lucha continua, meaning the fight continues. So this fight is not over and it's not beginning. It's something that we've been in and we continue in. Today, in the spirit of understanding how do we balance and contextualize this experience, called on one of my elders, and that is Dr. Professor Mahmoud El-Kati, the griot, former historian, teacher at McAllister University and University of Minnesota. And he's going to be on Friday, looking at, but we use the phrase, the resistance. Right now, we're going to have this idea of continuing our presence as a resistance to domination, resistance to the oppression that we have experienced over the centuries. Let me bring in my brother and partner and friend, former Senator Jeff Hayden. Jeff Hayden leads Hayden Strategies. Now he advises people on political opportunity and challenge. Brother Jeff, good to see you, man. What are you thinking, man?
Wow, wow, wow. Can you hear me? You guys can hear me?
Perfectly, yeah, certainly.
Yeah, what a night. I had an opportunity to kind of watch it up front. I was at the Care 11 studios who had the direct
Mhm.
NBC feed, right? So I was able to not only, give my reaction, but I was also getting kind of like that first time information from the pundits in New York or wherever Lester Holt and those guys all came together. So you could see the trends pretty early on
Mhm.
via the exit polls, and as the polls started closing on the East Coast and that wave was coming. And so it became pretty clear, it's in Georgia and North Carolina. And then, as the blue wall, if you will, kind of came into play, the Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin, that the message of the economy, and what in like the literal translation of what you're paying for gas and what you're paying for food and what is happening right now, not the why, not who got us there, but right now, that there was an effective message that placed that on the Biden-Harris administration, and that Vice President Harris couldn't move from that. The second thing that was pretty clear, and I think it will keep on coming out, is this issue of immigration at the border.
Mhm.
And let me just play that out a little bit. Is immigration at the border translates into public safety. Public safety translates into like Maslow's, right? Like this was like I'm calling it a Maslow's election, that people were really only thinking, or a lot of people were thinking just about, food and their safety and their security. And regardless, we can get into how that played out, but the MAGA movement and Donald Trump, with all of the hyperbole and all the things misogyny and racism, he really focused in on those issues. And the other issue was kind of the underlying culture war, really demonizing the LGBTQIA community, specifically the transgender community, as it relates to them being a direct threat to not only your way of life, but also maybe to the safety and security of your children. And we saw that with those ads. And so those things really kind of went. I do want to say this, and then I'm willing to take any questions, is the numbers, especially in the Latino community, and I think that this also was reflected somewhat in the Black community, is that the party, the Democratic Party, is going to have to figure out that these communities are not a monolith, not much less them taking them for granted. But there are communities, and within communities, gender, how long they've been in this country, their birthright, where they were at in the class system. And it was clear that even though the Trump administration and the MAGA movement was going after Latinos, but clearly there were Latinos there that didn't think that they were talking to them, and they voted strongly for President Trump.
Haley, always jump in. This is a conversation, so feel free to jump in and interrupt me and Jeff likewise. You know how we do this. We are our people talking to our people,
That's right.
having a private conversation for the whole world to lean into
That's
and
right.
listen to. And if you're checking us out on any of our platforms, we want your voice in here as well. So drop comments in, like Brother Sanchez is doing. Thank you for your notes and your narrative as we go. And others who are listening, share. Let people know your voice is important. Go ahead, Haley.
Yeah, I mean, I really just want to build off of what you were saying, Jeff, about the issues that impacted the results of this election. I think for Gen Z, we truly see a lot of what you mentioned, as oftentimes, for a lot of people at least, like masking what they really feel. So they say the economy and gas prices, but what they mean is, I don't want to vote for a woman. That's what they mean. And so, and you hear about, like, any other issues, and what they mean is they don't want to vote for a Black woman. And so that's really, I think, how a lot of Gen Z is gonna. I mean, I really think this is an election that will solidify Gen Z and our core values, our beliefs, our stances. And as we come of age to vote, because some of Gen Z is still in 8th grade, so as we come of age to vote, I mean, you'll really see pushes for the issues that you mentioned. And others as well. I think that for me, as I was watching this, it truly was a reminder of the misogyny and just blatant sexism that still is very, very prominent in this country. And obviously racism as well, her intersectionality of being Black and a woman. It really showed that the hate that people still carry, so many millions of people still carry. So I think that's where I'm at. So it's really interesting to hear your add onto those issues as well.
Yeah, well, I think to add on that, and then maybe a little twist, is that I think that often you see people of color, and that's why I don't like to use the term, but I'm going to use it for this. And you'll say, "Can't you see the racism? Why would you vote for that person?" Right? Can't you see what they say about you? And often people, either because of the way that they've been socialized and trained, they just think, hey, that ain't no big deal to me. I mean, I've talked to plenty of Black men like, hey, man, what's the big deal, Jeff? You know, I don't feel like my world has changed or whoever's in there. And so I'm going to start to go towards the McKees more, or I'm going to start to figure out, like, I like the aggressive person, or you know, I've heard a lot of people who didn't, and I tried to explain this the other day on Al Flowers' show, how we got to the stimulus check, right? And that was driven by the pandemic and the inaction of the Trump administration, that while we watched that thing go across from Asia all the way to Europe and get to us, the inaction finally created us to have to shut the economy down. And the stimulus checks were really kind of given by the Pelosi administration. And Donald Trump really didn't want to do it. And when he finally did it, he put his name on it. But the manifestation of that is I hear brothers, if that's all we talking, saying, hey, man, I got these 3 checks from Trump in them, and I think I'm going to get 3 more. My ability to try to explain to them, and then there's something in politics in a practical way to say, if you're explaining, you're losing. So I have to kind of walk people through it, and often their attention span are not there, that they don't want to hear it. And so they just thought about, hey, Donald Trump's going to get in there, and so I'm going to get some more money. As ignorant as that may sound, right? And it is pretty ignorant, right? But here's the deal. If we're only approaching that proverbial brother, sister in October of 6 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks before the election, you're going to lose them. If we're having this conversation now, and we continue to have this conversation through the next election cycle, and we're actively listening to what people are talking about, and then developing a strategy that we either are going to do things to help you, or in the case of somebody like Senator Champion, he is doing those things. But we have to amplify that. We have to drive them to the process so that they can benefit from it. But if the only time we're going to talk about these issues and the only time we're going to explain what's happening is a couple of weeks before, then we're taking that vote for granted. Let me just also say this. We don't do that to white women, right? And white women in the suburbs, we're talking to them consistently. I'm speaking about the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Like, they're consistently looking at those swing voters. They're consistently looking at those folks and driving their message all the time. They're continuously listening to them, and then coming out of legislative and congressional sessions, providing the necessary resources or the policies that people are asking them to do. In the African American community, that often doesn't happen, and they end up showing up at our church, right, or on a forum like this, you know, a couple of days before the election cycle. So I want to make sure that we're reflective, and that we not assuming everybody's a Democrat, but in this particular case, that Democrats are really taking a really good look at what happened, what were their messages, what are the things that they took for granted that I think they consistently took for granted, and that they heeded, and that it came to heed yesterday. That's I want to make sure we're not just simply saying, you know, I don't understand why people, you know, didn't vote a certain way. I think that there's a mechanism, and there's a reason why people do that, and there's a reason why people are disenfranchised from the process.
Right. And I think that's great that you said, because I think that loops into the conversation we were having yesterday about education. You know, like, it's not, like you said, staying consistent with our messaging, but also constant with our messaging. And that starts young. That doesn't even start like like when someone's a certain age, like you can start that education and informing Black men, Black women, people of color, whatever it may be, why certain elections tie to policy and how that can impact your life. That starts young and that's consistent, to your point, Jeff. It's not something that you just do when you need them. It's not something you just do when it's convenient. And I think, it's time for Democrats to have that tough conversation, or people on that side to have that tough conversation of valuing of the Black vote as well. Black women, Black men, to your point, going to those communities and talking to them and getting their experiences and their interests and asking for their vote, but also their engagement with the elected officials. It's something that's continuous and needs to be. And like I said, as a Black woman, this election feels and it is a lot of sexism and racism. And it's really time to have these conversations about educating our audience as to why, Trump being elected does impact policies, does impact their lives, but also why it's important to, get that engagement a year round and starting young. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, I think that there'll be some what we call, post-mortem or autopsies of, what happened. And I think that we have to learn from that. I think that we have to have serious conversations. I'll give you an example. I am one of the biggest fans of Barack Obama that there could be. I mean, I just can't. My political career started on the heels of his election, et cetera, et cetera. I thought the president had the absolute wrong message when he talked to Black men this year. I thought that he, was kind of blamed them. He said there was an obligation. Like, I don't think that there was. And we heard it, nationally. I heard it from my friends in California. I heard it on the block at the barbershop that somehow, we decided that we were going to shame you or push you into voting for Vice President Harris, who I also have a personal connection to. She belongs to the same church that my mother does. So I am a big fan of these folks. However, what I didn't hear was us, especially until late, was us saying to Black men, what are the things that this administration is going to do specifically to enhance your life? What are the wrongs that they're going to repair? What are the economic opportunities that they're going to have out there for you? What are the things that we need to do? I say this all the time. Part of welfare reform, which I was on Health and Human Service committees when I was in the legislature, but part of the welfare reform was you really kind of robust regulatory process going after the non-custodial parent, which usually was the father, and in this case was the Black father. So the mom goes to the county or to the government wanting some economic assistance to help raise their child and health care. They open up a case. I've worked in this system. They ask you who the child's father is. In this case, you say the name. That person might be young and not have the means to take care of it. They then assign like a dollar amount to them per month, right? And say that this is what you're going to owe in child support while you do it. You often don't have the money to pay. So then that grows. Follow me here. So now all of a sudden you get a big bill. So now you get 23, 24, 25, get yourself together, you start working, and now you owe the government a set amount of money. And you still owe the mom because you got to raise your child. You should. I don't want anybody to think that you shouldn't help to raise your child. However, that debt will follow them. The federal government has already expended the money. That debt will follow them until eternity, right? And we hear the child support conversation in our community, and it's disproportionately lays upon Black men's feet. I'm using something small and almost anecdotal to say, let's talk about that. And what is something that we could do to relieve you of that? We don't talk about that. What we say is you owe it, you should pay it. We don't. So then the brother says, okay, fine. And you start layering those things onto brothers' lack of education, as you talked about, Haley. We know the criminal justice system is disproportionate in the treatment of Black men. I can go on. You start to put those things over and over and over. We know what the generational trauma. Sam Simmons has probably been on this show talking about generational trauma and all that kind of stuff. So if you start layering that, and then you come to that person and say, it's your obligation and you owe that woman to vote for her without addressing any of the underlying issues that government has imposed from a public policy perspective on them, well, no wonder you get people either apathetic or looking for another place to go. I don't think we have that conversation enough, Al and Ailey and my good friend Jonathan. I think we have to have that conversation so that we can thoughtfully engage Black men in this process.
I would agree with you.
Jonathan, go ahead. Yeah.
I agree with you, Jeff. I think though there's a further step back, and I think it goes back to why did we even have that system in place in the first place? Why were we even looking towards that? What you see in the history of our country is systems that have been set up for failure for Black and brown people, for women, for immigrants, and we don't have enough conversation about that. Why is there a welfare system in place? And as you have that system in place, when you create these measures to create accountability, are you looking at a holistic solution, or are you looking at just a penalizing solution? We too often are looking at, here's the penalty that you've got to pay. And when you have somebody who can't get out of whatever cycle they're in or whatever system that they've been stuck into, then all you're doing is building up that debt. And America loves debt. We love to go ahead and put taxes on the poor and make it harder for them to get out of cycles of poverty. And so part of this, I think we've got to deconstruct those systems that were put in place in the first place, coming out of slavery, coming out of Jim Crow, which white people don't like to talk about, but the reality is they are there. And that is what this has all been built upon. And until we start dealing with some of the root causes of that, we're going to just keep changing the face and the name of the new system that we put in place to go ahead and penalize people for being poor.
I think you're right. I think we're saying the same thing. What I'm saying is to engage however we like to engage the conversation. What I'm getting at is we don't engage it.
Yes.
Right. We don't, whatever, if we want to take it back to the passage, to the middle passage, or do we want to talk about, the New Deal, or we want to talk about the famous movie Claudine that really, depicted that system. We don't have the conversation, but part of it is we're not listening to us. Here's what I want to get to. I want to get to the practicality of the matter. This vote was a practical vote. I mean, there are all these other big issues, but they were able to capture this kind of like right here, right now, what's going on with you. And I'm going to promise you, even though I think it's malarkey, but I'm going to promise you that things are going to get better. And we kind of talked about, we went after President Trump, which we should have. We made that the central theme of the issue was his character and his behavior and all of his misogyny and toxicity and racism, right? We said, look at all of these folks. They went and said, look, your groceries are 30% higher. Your gas is 50% higher. And oh, by the way, them people is coming over the border and they finna disrupt your way of life. And I'm 45% Latino. I mean, that blew my mind, considering that just a week ago they had a guy under the Trump banner who was insulting Latinos and Black people in a way that I thought was artificial intelligence when I first saw it. I thought there's no way that they would say that. So there's something deeper and richer that we need to talk about that they capture, that we have to kind of come off of our horse and kind of dig into that. And I think that we'll find like our messaging is off. I also think that we'll find that we're not listening. The Iron Range, let's just go to Minnesota. Right now, Minnesota, the way that it looks is that we're going to have a 34-33 Senate, 67-67 House. It only happened one time in like 1978. It's going to be, for a guy like me who's just all in the middle of it, it's going to be like, wow, what do we do here? But on the Iron Range, Al and Jonathan, and I'm sorry, Haley, you probably don't remember this. They lost their congressional seat by 34 points to Democrats. This was so for those who don't know the history, I just happen to have served and sat with and been amongst Iron Rangers for almost my whole career. These are some of the most legendary political Democrats this state has ever heard of. People like Governor Perpich, Lieutenant Governor Perpich, Willard Munger, right? Tom Bach, Tommy Rukavina. Like these are these big names in Minnesota politics that drove it. They are 34 points underwater. The Democrats are on the range. to take it out of our community and just not on race. There's something going on that the Democrats are missing in terms of working class people.
What is it? Jeff, let me ask you and Jonathan and Haley, because when I go to Costco, for example, or restaurants, when I, coming out of COVID, got back out into the community, like everybody else, we experienced the shock of not having things and having to hoard a little bit, stock up on stuff. But when we started moving around after we seemed to have moved beyond the imminent disaster that COVID could mean for all of us as individuals, and we saw the society itself protecting itself and being able to loosen up. When I looked around, I said, man, life is good for white people. So it surprises me to keep hearing this story that white people feel that their way of life is threatened, that the cost of living for them is something that's untenable or unmanageable, because from where I stand and from my perspective, looking at them, life looks pretty damn good. Now, I could be misreading it, and maybe they're only pretending. And so if life is good, if they're doing okay, basically, right, and not in the arena of consistent and perennial, what's the right word, lack that has characterized our existence as a people coming out of the horror of Jim Crow and the horror of neglect and the horror of slavery. We've been on the up and up from the beginning, since we've been in this country, in the hemisphere. So, but when I look around at what I perceive to be ordinary white people, seems to me the suburbs are bustling. All of the restaurants, all the retail stores, from what I can tell, I could be reading it wrong. So, Jeff, what do you think?
Well, we stop at the same Costco, so I don't know if it's those very wealthy Western suburban.
I'm there too.
Al and I see each other.
So Jonathan too. I see Jonathan.
Costco. I think it's perspective, though. So I've started to figure this out a little bit, especially my time in the legislature. My life experience is not their life experience, and so I'm coming out of the life experience of what you said, Al. Like, wait a minute, you guys look like you're doing just fine. But from their perspective, right, that might be something about, hey, they had to spend, they had to dip into a savings that we don't have to do something, right? That might mean that they have to leverage a loan from their house that we don't have to do something. But from their perspective,
and they got a house and we don't.
But they got a house and we don't to even.
We're trying to get a house.
But from their perspective, that's problematic because that's not how they had to have it. And I think that this is an important understanding. If we, as leaders, that we have to understand us, but we can't think that everybody is looking at the world through our existence. They're looking at it through their existence. And from them, when they have to take a dip, when the stock market dips, when they have to reach into their 401k, things that we might not even have, but from their perspective, that's a problem. And usually people don't take accountability for it. And what the Trump administration or what others do is they say, hey, see that Hayden, see that Palmer, see that McFarlane, see that car they drive, see how they're walking around. See, what the problem with why you got to dip into your savings is because McFarlane done took all your money. See, there's a game that gets played on people, and if you keep that consistently going, that's I think is trying to answer a little bit of your question now.
And so
let me
that's exactly it. That's exactly it. But I'm thinking that the interpretation of that, from my point of view, is an interpretation or an analysis of the falsehood of racial power, of hierarchical power. And so there's an expectation and normalization that the sons and daughters of those who have been enslaved and even those who are coming as immigrants here, if you didn't buy into this idea of supremacist power, of this feeling of what's the right word, privilege, and what is happening is that feeling, that reality is being challenged by the nature and flow of the universe itself, not across borders being crossed, both geographic, national borders, internal borders, population shift, demographic changes, but also mental borders, an ability to question the truth of that presumed privilege and that presumed narrative that says that the world is my idea. And if that idea is being threatened by somebody who says, yeah, well, we're here too, and your idea it's a good one, but it's no better than mine or his or hers or theirs, and that we got to come up with a way that acknowledges all of our shared responsibility and our shared capacity to recraft how we share power and create futures, and that is what is at stake. I think that white people, as the fiction of white people, of being white, it's a fiction, right? But that fiction is what sustains, that narrative sustains their advantage, their sense of advantage, and that's what they're fighting to protect, even though from our side, they live in pretty good. And as we question it, we're not saying you shouldn't live good. Good for you. But we think that there's enough for all of us to live better. And it's a question of how we approach that. Our approach is not the model of scarcity, but a model of balance and sharing that's different. Jonathan, go ahead.
But I think that's the problem right there, is that we're talking about sharing power. And the narrative that has been taught to white people has been that you are the top. Since since they first came to this country, and since they had 264 years of us in bondage, it is, you are the top, you are better than all else. And the moment you start saying, hey, this person over here that you've always been told you're better than, you now have to share, or they now have rights equal to yours, or you have to allow them to do things, that's when it starts to mess with the mindset. Sometimes it's not even conscious for them that they're seeing things are changing. Their whole life and their outset, they've been taught this way, that they are the top and they are the number one. And then you start introducing these other ideas of parity, and they're like, wait a minute, it's not connecting the dots. You take a look at Tulsa, 1921. You have there Black millionaires. You have Black businesses. You have this thriving district, and you have people, white soldiers returning from World War I, that don't have a pot to piss in. They don't have anything, and they're looking around at these Black people who have more than them. That's not the narrative that they've been taught since they were the teeniest of kids. And so when you're talking about shared power, when you're talking about things like Black Lives Matter, all of that goes ahead and it attacks their mindset. We're not just saying, hey, here's an idea you should consider. It's saying everything that you've been taught is wrong. Everything that you have believed your whole life, the supremacy of white people that you have been living your life around is wrong, and you have to change it. That is an attack on their very self. So when they push back, when they yell, when they go ahead and they grab around, MAGA and things like that, I think many of them don't even understand fully what it is that they are investing in or standing against. They just know that what was theirs, somebody over here is telling them, we're taking that away from you. Black and brown people, women, immigrants, they're taking it away from you. And it's usually that rich person who has the majority of the resources. There's a little comic about a rich person with a whole plate of cookies and a poor white person with one cookie, saying that immigrant over there or that Black person over there is trying to take your cookie. And it's not looking at the whole system.
I think that's interesting. I think that is a really interesting point. And I definitely have seen elements of what you're saying. And I think that's kind of sometimes what makes the coalition of the Democratic Party hard is a lot of times and in a lot of situations, it's boils down to our connection is that we are not Republican, rather than having shared policies and purposes that we communicate and band together on. And it's not that we don't have those policies or values in common, but oftentimes people end up being voting or identifying as Democrat just because they're not Republican. And I think that goes back to the issues that we were talking about at the beginning too, the policies and the outreach. And like I said, it's not that we don't have those policies in common or those values or morals in common. It's really that education in that community. And I think that there's something that I've been sitting on that Jeff was talking about And it's really about the sexism of this election, and how oftentimes these messages or these groups that we're not getting out there, that we're not contacting, lead to division, even though we are on the same team. It leads oftentimes to division amongst ourselves. And it's really interesting for me when I've spoken to people that are people of color or a certain demographic that you would think they would understand what's at stake, but instead they're voting for Trump. And Black men, for example, when Trump has directly attacked Black men on numerous occasions, say the Central Park Five, for example, it's really interesting to see their reasoning when they do vote for Trump as to why. And I know as a Black woman, it can often feel like the election is we're not showing up for Black women is oftentimes how these results and how these elections go and feel. Black women consistently turn out and consistently, despite the fact that, like I said, oftentimes the Democratic coalition is divided, the Republican coalition is certainly not for us. And interesting to see that other groups, we talked about Black men earlier, but Hispanics, Latinos, LGBTQ, it's interesting to see why they vote for Trump, although it's very clear the Republican Party is not for them. And it like I said, it boils down back to that lack of education, that lack of outreach. And I think that's really interesting, Jonathan, what you're saying about all of your points. Mm-hmm. I see it.
And I'll just say this, there's, this is a rich and a deep conversation, and we've all got a lot of history in it. I'll just go back to the practicality of it. My good friend Al McFarlane has been running this paper for ever, like long time,
50 years,
50 years, right? I knew it was around that same amount of time. He has been consistent. He's been there. I can tell you where this paper, when Senator Champion and I had trumped up charges by Republicans, and it wasn't going well for us in the public opinion, in the Star Tribune world, right? Like the big media was laying in on us. And Mr. McFarlane wrote a headline that says, it feels like the way that they're treating Senator Hayden Champion is like 12 years a slave.
Mm-hmm.
Totally changed. It changed everything about it. It got out there. It changed the way they looked at it. He was persuasive. It also meant when people Googled us, they just didn't see what these trumped up charges were. They also got to see the insight story that gave a counter opinion. Mm-hmm. Now, I want to say that because that's real for me. That's why I was one of the few people that can call me at 1:05 for a 1 o'clock show, and I get on here. I'm keeping it real, right? Because and I'll move things around if I have to. But let me say this: the Democratic Party spent billions of dollars on media, billions, not millions, but billions of dollars running those ads. They cost digital ads, literature. This is an industry. I got friends in this business that simply just make money on that part of it. I got colleagues that their side hustle, if you will, is just to place digital ads or create them or whatever. I will tell you, and I know that Mr. McFarlane does not see anywhere near what he should see based on who he is, his track record, his voice, his clarity, right? I'm not disclosing any business. I'm not suggesting Al or Mr. McFarlane doesn't receive or doesn't do some business with him, but I can tell you it's not at the scale that's right. And it certainly doesn't, because if he could do that, then we could have these important conversations frequently and all the time. The things that you're talking about, Haley, require like depth and discussion and history and an understanding and a bit of a back and forth, all of that. So we're able to try to get on and to try to get out to where we need to get. But Mr. McFarlane should have so much more resources just based on election cycles alone, and he doesn't get it there. And then the postscript of this will be like, hey, the brothers didn't show up for whoever, or the Black people didn't do whatever, but but the resources never got pushed to our community, right? in a way that allows us to be able to amplify that and to get that out. That's the kind of introspection, that's the type of accountability that I want to hold. Look, I can talk about, I have friends in Republicans, Democratic circles. I don't know if I have any MAGA friends. My party's the Democratic Party, right? My people are Black people, right? The Democratic Party and Black people are like synonymous. They're symbiotic. They used to be, but that's starting to come apart because Black people are starting to get hip that the Democratic Party is not giving them the same amount of respect, i.e. resources, conversation, power that they need as being loyal constituents to them. Now, where they go, if they don't go anywhere, or they take a chance with MAGA, which I think is foolish, but they are starting to move away. And so this is a strong message to my friends. And, this is a strong message to my friends, and they are my friends, that if they don't, before we get to like what's going to happen 2 years from now, if they don't reflect and start to change on the way in which they think about these elections, they're going to continue to happen this way.
Let me throw something in that'll stretch the conversation to make a point. I think when I was in high school, Jeff, in the 1960s, the threat we faced then was the threat of a potential nuclear war. We had in high school and grade school the drills where they wanted us to get under our desk in the classroom to protect us from a nuclear blast. Yeah. How crazy was that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
That was the ramping up of awareness of the potential of annihilation and weak as it sounded, public strategy in response to keep yourself safe in the case of a. So some of my white friends in high school said, well, war with Russia or conflict with Russia, honestly, Al, my life wouldn't be much different under the Soviet Union than it is today under Eisenhower or Kennedy or Nixon, whoever the president was at the time. And the reason is I'm white. Mm-hmm. Your life might be different, but in a material way, I'm going to either still be a draftsman, an engineer, a scientist, a doctor, a worker, but my life will not be a whole lot different because I come from the same European worldview, value system, opportunity process, ecosystem, and how will my life change? So I say that to say that, if we issue the stern warning you have just issued to our friends in the Democratic Party, are we prepared to hear back from them? Jeff, Al, Jonathan, Haley, my life is not going to be really different in the MAGA world than it is now. They may be toying with that idea. It's a dangerous idea. We know that it's not true because what we have always stood for and always delivered is an idea and a capacity to make real and to bring vitality and meaning to the promise and the potential of democracy. Democratizing the society and the world is a direct consequence of our ability to seek freedom. And the freedom that we've always sought has been a freedom that doesn't exclude, but rather includes everybody. That's why we're not at odds with everybody else getting rights and not locked into keeping people excluded at the border. We think everybody has a chance to grow. That's my thought. Jeff, what do you think?
I think you're right. And I got to run, but I think that's the right discussion. And so we got to keep having this discussion. We have to be open to everybody's viewpoints. The last thing I will lead you, and this is kind of something a little more that I hear. Haley, you're about the same age as my daughter. So this and I talked to her this morning, and so it's pretty emotional to me. But we have to be able to listen to everybody. We got to be able to understand without quote unquote canceling them, even if we disagree. Because if we don't listen to them, that gives them a right to educate them, to give them a right to hear them out, to give them a right. If we say, nope, we ain't going to hear it. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to go online and I'm going to tell everybody who you are and why you ain't no good and all that kind of stuff. What happens is they get quiet. Mm-hmm. But that quietness was just reflected in the vote yesterday.
Mhm.
They do. It does come out. You know what your grandma say? What's done in the dark, right, comes to light, right? Everything comes out in the wash, right? So we have to be able to open up and have dialogue like this in person on a platform like this, and give people the opportunity. I go on these shows and often people will talk about. I like to pick on my friend Al Flowers. He says stuff about 30 of it. I'd be like, that ain't true. I don't believe that. That ain't how I feel. Or my friend John, former Representative John Thompson, who will say, I don't necessarily agree, but they do have the right to say it, because then we have the right to report it, and then we can grow together. If we don't do that, if we kind of stay there and we wait for them to do it for us, if they're not listening to us, then the next thing you know, we're gonna, and we know at the end of the day, whatever happens to this country, we're always going to be at the bottom of it unless we really start to fight for our position at the top and become leaders. With that being said, I gotta run.
Jeff, thank you for being here.
Appreciate
Absolutely.
it. Call me anytime. Good to talk.
We'll get you back. We'll get you back.
Great to
Jonathan,
see you.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Well, what I'll say, first of all, anybody who thinks their life wouldn't be different under Russia obviously has never seen Red Dawn, and that's on them.
Okay.
But the interesting thing, Al, when you talked about that fear of nuclear war that was there when you were in high school and when I was in high school, it goes back to the U.S.'s foreign policy. U.S.'s foreign policy since the turn of the 20th century has always included three things: Israel, oil, and a phantom menace that you could always point to and say, this is what you should be afraid of. You should be afraid of this, and it breeds nationalism. And so what you had communism, then you had nuclear war, then you had terrorism. Now it's immigrants coming into the country, and it gives politicians something.
Before that was black people. What they would do if they were freed.
It still is black people. And
I talked to Mahmoud Al-Qadi this morning. He was just reflecting on General Pershing. His name was, I think his note was, they called him Black Jack, who sent 500,000 African Americans to war in France to fight against the Western side in the World War I. And he told the French commanders, don't talk with them. They can fight, let them fight, but don't talk to them. Don't shake hands with them. Don't let them engage in conversations about the world or anything of consequence. Let them go fight and die, but don't treat them like they are real people. And most of all, don't let them be engaged with white women, right? And so we can die, we can be fodder, and we volunteered and we moved because we thought there was a chance to change the heart and the mind and to demonstrate our loyalty to this country and to the idea of a democracy. That was part of our resistance, our strategy. But the point I guess I'm making is that even when we were putting ourselves and our lives on the line, the institution devalued us from the beginning, and it still continues to do that.
Yes.
Go ahead, Jonathan. I'm sorry.
And no, that's the truth. And that's when I look at the loss last night, that's what I'm choosing to blame. I'm not going to go and say this group didn't do enough and that group didn't do enough, because the reason behind whatever group didn't vote the way that I would have liked them to has to do with sexism, racism, xenophobia. There were white women and black men who didn't vote for Kamala because they didn't think a woman should be in charge. There were Latinos who didn't vote because they feel more aligned with economic policy. There's all sorts of reasons, and all of that comes from that disconnect that we have within this country, where we don't know that our self-interest deals with everybody coming together. There's enough here to share if we work together on that, versus the tiered system that goes ahead and allows people to discriminate and to marginalize and to section off by saying, oh, Haley shouldn't have a say in this because she's too young. She doesn't have enough experience. She is dynamite and has done so much in her young life that
Mhm.
most people haven't accomplished at your and my age, Al.
Mhm. That's
So
right.
we use little things like that to dismantle or dismiss people when they actually have a lot to contribute.
So, Haley, let me ask you, how does your generation look to you from within? I'm a critic of my generation and of the social arrangement that it inherited and also maintained and still maintains. It's giving it up begrudgingly, and our job has been and remains resistance, 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 fight, fight, fight. And we know that the fight has been the reason for our continued move towards liberation, towards freedom. And the freedom that we're seeking is not only for our personal selves and families and children and successors, but we know that that freedom is linked to freedom for every human being. And we know that it's connected to a different way of assembling how humans interact with the entire ecosystem and the environment. That's what makes us natural environmentalists. And that also allows us to be connected to other people's ability to define themselves and for us to respect how they define themselves, in as much as those definitions don't preclude the acceptance of our humanity. What do you think, Haley? How does your generation look from within?
I think it goes back to where we started, and also what the conversation has been today and over the last couple of days. I mean, I said it at the beginning of this, to Gen Z, especially to Gen Z Black women, but Black women in all generations. This was an act of misogyny and sexism. And it's really interesting to see who values their gas prices more than my human rights and more than my liberty and my freedom. And you know, and like I was kind of saying earlier, a lot of this is a lot of it is also the sexism part about male dominance, about wanting to be courted, and about not really showing up for Black women. And like I said, Black women have shown up consistently. Black women voted for Obama. Black women voted for Biden. I mean, it really is. It really is your values, your core. At the end of the day, the candidate may not be perfect. The policies may not be, all of them may not be for you. And that goes to the education, that goes to the connectedness of the Democratic coalition, not just being a party of non-Republicans, but truly a party of Democrats. But at the end of the day, we are also not Republicans, and that matters as well, and that shows in our values and our actions. So I mean, to answer your question, I think that's where Gen Z is at, and like I said, especially Gen Z Black women. This was a blatant act of sexism and racism, and we'll never forget it. You know, I mean, it really, we've been watching, we've grown up watching. And like Jonathan was saying about people who've grown up since they were little kids with a certain mindset of what's theirs or what can be taken from them. You know, we've grown up with a certain mindset as well as what's ours and what we need to fight for. And that's where I started this conversation with. We need our elders. We need their wisdom. This truly is a conversation of generational interconnectedness, turning and relying to those who have fought the fight in the civil rights era and really made great strides. But we can learn a lot, and we have the voices, we have the energy, we have the time, and they have the experience, they have the expertise, they have the wisdom. And truly, if we come together, it'll be an unstoppable force. And I think that's the power that's pushing. You know, obviously the election results are disappointing, of course, but the fight wasn't going to be over regardless of who won. And I think that's a misconception. And when you realize that, you do still get a lot of hope and a lot of steam from what's ahead. You know, so that's where Gen Z is at.
Jonathan, the final word is yours, my friend.
I am encouraged to hear Haley say that. I think it's also incumbent upon the elders to listen to the younger people, because they have ideas, they understand technology, they can open that PDF for you, they can go ahead and help see some of the patterns that, you know, were very problematic in our days, but which this generation comes together across. So I look forward to the future, and maybe it's Haley who runs to be the president of the United States.
Well, let's leave it right there. I call that a mic drop. Thank you so much. Listen, Haley Taylor Slitz, attorney, assistant attorney general, state of Minnesota, working with AG Keith Ellison, Jonathan Palmer, your organization, Nonprofit Heroes for Hire, LLC. a regular contributor to this program and to Insight News. Thank you both very much. Thanks to all of those who've been watching the program. We want you to like this conversation and share it, and let people know that we do this every day. We're going to stay focused on the election for the next several days, and we want to hear your voice. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.